All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I am excited to have so many participants already in the room, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the annual CSAF State of the Sector webinar. We host this webinar every year alongside the publication of our annual report, which was published last week. And this year's annual report focuses very much on compounding risks and how CSAF members continue to serve the agriculture SME sector despite these compounding risks in order to deliver impact. So today, we're starting off with a welcome session just for those of you who might not be as familiar with CSAF, and then Ada Dokle from the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion will dig into some of the data trends from the 2022 data provided by CSAF members. And then we're very excited to welcome Marco Garcia from Shared Interest and Esther Mareca from Incofin, who will be able to share some practitioner perspectives of what that data actually means in practice and in the field, and bring some context onto the numbers that Ada will share. And then at the end of the call, we will have a Q&A session. So please submit your questions in the chat box at any time throughout the webinar, and then we'll try to answer as many as we can in the final 20 or 15 or so minutes of the webinar. So I will jump right in. Hopefully most of you on the call are already familiar with CSAF, but for those of you who might be new or need a refresher, the Council on Smallholder Agriculture Finance was founded in 2012, and it's an alliance of institutions coming together to share learning and promote three key objectives. The first being market growth, addressing the unmet financing needs of small and medium-sized enterprises or agriculture SMEs. And when we talk about SMEs, we're including both producer organizations, farmer cooperatives, as well as private enterprises who are aggregating farmers and purchasing from smallholder farmers all over the world. When we do that, we're focusing on responsible lending practices, aiming for social and environmental standards in this growing market. And then meanwhile, we're also trying to build a stronger ecosystem for inclusive and sustainable financial markets and agriculture value chains. Right now, we're counting 20 members. We welcomed 3 new members this year: Compani, ABC Fund, and Nest. And we also have 10 field building partners who are institutions that are aligned with our goals in promoting a more inclusive and sustainable agriculture SME finance sector. And in addition to being our learning partners, our field building partners, their support also ensures that the data and insights that are presented soon by Ada and the annual report remain publicly available, and that data is free to the public and to the sector. So we've had a very busy year at CSAF over the last 12 months, and I will just share a few highlights, especially in the last 6 months, of things that maybe you can look towards if you want to dig into your knowledge of CSAF or the agriculture SME finance sector. And the first is an evidence review that was published in May. This was commissioned by CSAF with co-funding from SAFN, and the evidence review published by the International Growth Center analyzed the current evidence base for agriculture SME finance and identifies what further research needs to be done in order to build a robust evidence base for the sector. So we believe that we need to marry academic rigor with practitioner relevance. And if you haven't reviewed this report yet, I encourage you to review the executive summary. And if you have time to dig deeper into the literature review or the analysis of CSAF member data, this for us is what we believe is a way that we can have a first step to identifying the evidence gaps. And then we want to move forward by continuing to engage stakeholders on a coordinated learning agenda and apply findings to influence the capital flows and policy, allowing us to mobilize additional capital to the agriculture SME finance sector and have that capital be oriented towards maximum impact. So the evidence review is a first step, and we're looking forward to continuing to foster evidence building alongside our CSAF members, policymakers, field building partners, and other practitioners. Another big report I will point you to is in June, Value for Women published this case study, which is reviewing how 3 CSAF members are applying a gender lens investment approach to their organization and to their investment strategy. And this initiative was sponsored by our CSAF member, Root Capital, with funding from the Walmart Foundation. And following several trainings that Value for Women delivered to CSAF global representatives and regional staff, there was a one-on-one advisory engagement with 3 CSAF members, Alterfine, Cordate, and Incofine. And this case study publishes lessons learned from the gender lens investment journey of each of these investors, as well as offers general guidance and key entry points for other investors to incorporate a gender lens into their investment approach. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. All of these resources are available on our website. And then I also just want to highlight that we're coming out of our June convening where we gathered 50 different attendees from our CSAF members, field building partners, and other key stakeholders, where we were able to continue these conversations around building evidence, as well as zooming in on many of the risks that CSAF members and other practitioners in the agriculture sector continue to face, and how we can maximize impact despite those risks. So that's the kind of the conversation that we are bringing into this call today, and that influenced a lot of the annual report. And I don't want to bore you with too many activities, so I want to jump forward into some of the trends that we saw in 2022 and that we gathered from that data and from our member conversations. So the first one that you'll notice is that we saw a really big spike in lending in 2021, and we attributed a lot of that to some of the early impacts of COVID-19 wearing off. But what we were very excited to see this year is that lending activity remains high in 2022, demonstrating that CSAF members sustained high levels of disbursements. An interesting fact is that those disbursements were not steady across the board. There was a lot of variance across regions, lenders, and commodities. So there's more to the data than just the same amount of funding as last year. And so we can dig into some of those details with Ada. Another important trend to focus on is that there were significant price fluctuations in the commodity markets, which drove a lot of that regional variation. So the timing of different coffee harvests were affected by the volatility of the coffee price. And then the fourth trend that I will highlight is that additionality amongst CSAF members still remains high. So about 73% of borrowers are working with just one CSAF lender. That's almost 500 borrowers who just have one CSAF lender. And that's despite a very increasingly maturing agriculture SME finance market. So we're very happy to see that additionality is remaining steady. These are some of the high level impact numbers. So there was 750 million dispersed in 2022 to 655 different businesses. Those were divided between about 1,400 loans and collectively reached 2.6 million farmers across 60 countries. Those are the high level numbers. Ada has a lot more details, and so I will happily turn the speaker over to her to share more.
Thank you, Andrea. So my name is Ada Dokne from the Center for Financial Inclusion. For those of you who do not know the Center for Financial Inclusion, we are a think tank that believes in the power of research, and we advocate for evidence-based change to make sure that people can make use of financial products and services to improve their lives. So within this mission, we have partnered with CSAF for the past few years to bring better data insights to the Agri-SME finance sector. And CSAF has made all these insights available through 2 ways to the broader public. One is the State of the Sector report that is published every year, and the other one is the CSAF Data Portal. I'll come back to the portal at the end of this presentation again. So with this in mind, let's turn to some of the trends and insights from the collective CSAF members portfolio for the year ending December 2022. So I'll repeat some of the high-level numbers. In 2022, we see that the CSAF collective lending reached an amount of $751 million, and the lenders sustained high volumes after very considerable growth in the prior year. We see that the CSAF members reached 655 businesses. These businesses include cooperatives and private enterprises across almost 60 countries, reaching 2.6 roughly million smallholder farmers. These farmers are affiliated with borrowers that manage a median of 2 hectares of land per farmer, but this value drops in regions like Sub-Saharan Africa. So you've heard the big numbers. Let's look into more details and what the data is telling us. So like Andrea mentioned already, the 2022 data shows that the lending remained consistent with the prior year after a considerable growth by 35% in 2021. A slight majority of lenders increased their disbursements in 2022, which is a deviation from the prior year, where almost all CSAF members increased their disbursements. So we said that overall disbursements plateaued, but variations exist across regions. I'll start with South America, which is the only region practically that saw an increase in disbursements by 34 million from the prior years. In South America, we have Peru and coffee. This is where primarily the increase in disbursements is coming from for 2022. Peru is a country which compromises for 75% of the regional lending activity, and it also accounts for the most disbursements of the CSAF globally. So the disbursements in this country increased, and primarily this increase happened through coffee and loans that were in big sizes. So the next region to look at is Sub-Saharan Africa, which accounts for the largest share of global disbursements, but saw an increase by 4% in 2022. And the story is more nuanced within the region. Despite this 4% decline, we'll see that there are countries where loan disbursements have declined, like Cote d'Ivoire, for example, and Tanzania, while disbursements increase in other countries in the region, like Kenya, Uganda, and Burkina Faso. Cote d'Ivoire is one of those markets where disbursements decreased considerably by 30%, which is a return to 2020 levels, actually. And it is highly driven by cocoa borrowers through some number of loans. Meanwhile, there are these 3 countries that I mentioned there was an increase in disbursements: Kenya, Uganda, and Burkina Faso. And this increase is coming from value chains like tree nuts, fruit, and forestry. Central America is the third region among the top 3 regions financed, and it also contracted slightly in 2022. Disbursements to Nicaragua, which is the country that receives the largest share of disbursements, increase, unlike the regional trends. And despite the significant risks that were present in the country, including the instability of the coffee market and the political risks. However, on the other hand, we see that disbursements to coffee enterprises in Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Honduras dropped in 2022, contributing to the overall decline of the regional disbursements. You'll see that the disbursements in the chart on South and East Asia, the pink part, accounts for the smallest share of the overall disbursements other than the other regions. And this share has been dropping continuously over the past years, and it has dropped also in 2022. So we looked at the regional variations. I think now we can look how this overall plateau in disbursements played out in terms of value chains financed by CSAF members. Coffee again remains the most financed value chain for CSAF at 57% of lending, reaching an all-time high value in the past year. Actually, the share of coffee lending has changed over the years, and as you'll notice in the chart, it declined. So the share declined through 2016 as the members were pushing into new geographies and value chains and were grappling with coffee leaf for us. Since 2016, we see that the share of coffee lending has increased year on year, reaching a 57% in 2022. Talking in absolute values, coffee disbursements increased to a level of $427 million in 2022, but there are regional variations, and variations are among South America, Central America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. What do I mean by this is that coffee disbursements in South America and Sub-Saharan Africa grew as the harvest in these regions aligned with the rising commodity prices and increased demand for capital. Meanwhile, in Central America, there is a harvest that is between November and January, and the coffee disbursements decreased, primarily due to risk among borrowers, in addition to the price influence. So we talked about coffee, the first most financed commodity. The second most financed commodity, as you'll see from the chart, is cocoa. Disbursements to cocoa actually dropped in 2022, and you already heard me say this. The drop came primarily by a lower activity in Côte d'Ivoire, but also in Ghana. Some existing borrowers were receiving smaller ticket sizes. The third group of most financed commodity is nuts, and the disbursements to nuts increased actually in 2022 after a couple of years of a downward trend. And the increase is focused on Kenya and macadamia borrowers, which is a bit of a shift from prior years where we saw more of a cashew focus on Western Africa. So these were the three main groups in terms of value chain that received most financing. However, there is a presence of other value chains in the CSAF portfolio, and there continue to be activity in other value chains, which are fruits, vegetables, and cereals, and others, which may be considered riskier, but they're present there and they're important. Next is the analysis in terms of number of clients. And again, here you'll hear me say that there is a bit of a plateau because the number of clients has remained steady in the past 4 years in the portfolio. So the CSAF members have continued to focus on existing borrowers, which in year 2022, they represent 87% of the businesses served. So in 2022, CSAF members added collectively to the portfolio 88 new borrowers, and this is a number that is one of the highest since 2016. These borrowers are a combination of new borrowers added to the collective portfolio, but also returning borrowers that have had positive proven records with CSAF lenders. However, if we look between the geographies, we see that there are two different profiles in terms of the analysis by a borrower. One profile is a more mature client portfolio. We see that, for example, in Central and South America, the CSAF lending in 2022 focused on existing clients. The share of existing clients in these two regions was over 90%. Meanwhile, Africa is a region that there is a high churn in clients, and that continues year on year to be true. In this region, 80% of the borrowers remain existing, but however, this is also the region that has more new clients. Both of these two indicators show higher churn in the region. The next topic is additionality, which remains very important for this analysis. So as you'll see from the chart, in 2022, 73% of the CSAF borrowers were financed by only one CSAF lender. And this share has changed by a bit year on year. But what is surprising this year is that the share of clients served by more than 3 CSAF members has increased. And these are 4% of the CSAF clients, which were financed by more than 3 CSAF lenders, and they received 24% of the overall disbursements. However, if we look at the breakdown by region, this share changes. In the Americas, this is 70% of the loans served by one CSAF member. It goes up in Africa at 80%, and in the Southeast Asia, it goes up to 90%, financed by one single member. The last topic, but a very important one we want to touch base here, is risk. The overall level of normalized PAR, which reflects loans in arrears up to 375 days remain consistent with the prior year at 7.4%. Again, there are variations in this number, and we want here to mention two variations. One is by region. South America here also makes a difference. After a decline in PAR 30 in the prior year, we see that portfolio quality has worsened a bit from the prior year. 3% was PAR in 2021, and it grew to 8% in 2022. The other region where PAR increased is Africa, with PAR reaching 10%, as you can see from the chart. In terms of analysis of PAR by loan sizes, as expected, smaller loans continue to present more repayment risk than larger loans. And PAR 30 for small loans, specifically for those loans smaller than 250K, increased from almost 16% in 2021 to 22% in 2022. PAR 30, however, for larger loans remained unchanged. CSAF members have for many years reported that management capacity and misuse of funds are one of the main reasons for defaults in the portfolio. And these are in addition to other risks that are faced, like climate, market, and political challenges. So these were the main insights that we decided to present to you today. As we wrap up this short snapshot, I wanted to call out that everything that we shared today, but much more, is available on the CSAF Open Data Portal, which we launched in 2019. So the portal makes the richness of the CSAF members' collective experience available to the broad public to explore the trends in financing of Agri-SMEs and producer organizations. This portal will allow you to explore the same topics that we covered, but into greater details. It allows you to drill down by region, value chain, and more. So I invite you all to try it after the call and try to explore it. And if you have any suggestions, they're welcomed. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ada. And I want to specifically thank Ada for the tremendous work that she does. It's not an easy job to aggregate the portfolio of 20 different financial institutions. So I'm very continuously impressed every year with Ada's work. And also I want to thank CSAF members for contributing this data and being very generous in providing it to the sector so that we can dig deeper. I know there were some questions in the chat, and maybe Ada can answer some of them directly while we jump into our panel with Marco and Esther. So I'm very pleased to welcome Marco and Esther to this webinar today. Esther Mareka is the investment manager for agriculture, food, and food sector for Africa for Incofin Investment Management. And Marco Garcia is the lending manager for Central and North America for Shared Interest. So we have two very different regional voices on the call today. And I'll remind participants that they can ask questions throughout this panel in the chat box, and then we'll try to answer as many as we can in the Q&A session. So maybe we can get started with some overall trends. We saw from the 2022 data that CSAF members sustained high lending levels in 2022. However, it was very clear that there were different variances across regions. So maybe we can start with Esther, and I'll ask, based on your experience, maybe you can share more about some of the lending movements in sub-Saharan Africa and what some of the key challenges in the region have been over the last year.
Thank you, Andrea. If we can start with the lending, we've seen growth in traditional crops like coffee, nuts, cotton, and cocoa. Nuts in terms of nuts, cashew and macadamia, and we've also seen growth in different in other new crops like cotton, chia, sesame, and soya. And if I can just dig a little bit into the cocoa market, we've seen a decrease in Ivory Coast by almost 12% between October and June 2023. So the season runs from October to March, and by around January, they were out of beans to purchase. So most of the exporters did not get enough product during that season. So what happened is that the Coffee Council had to allow exporters to buy in the intermediary season, which runs from April to September. And then we've also seen high prices with unprecedented prices. The last time we saw such prices in cocoa was in 1977. And as much as the supply concerns continue to be there's also the worry that the price of other ingredients like sugar, and with the current inflationary environment, could also affect demand going into the half of the year 2023 and to the next year. There's also the EUDR regulation that is coming into place, and exporters have been given about 18 months to implement. So some of these players could be affected with the traceability requirements. Some of the challenges we experienced are regarding price risk in coffee. We saw a lot of volatility in the prices of coffee. And we saw, especially in Tanzania and Rwanda, where we had some clients in distress because of this price risk. They were not able to manage the price risk very well.
Thanks, Esther. I think there's a very clear correlation between these market dynamics in the key commodity markets and how that affects CSAF members and their borrowers. And I'm sure Marco can also speak to what that looks like in Central and South America, where we saw how the coffee prices, as well as many other factors, affected both increases in disbursements in South America and decreases in Central America. So I will invite Marco to complement Esther's comments with some insights from Latin America.
Thanks, Andrea, and good morning and good afternoon to those attending the webinar. Yes, definitely coffee play a key role on this phenomena for South America in 2022, mostly due to the significant increase in coffee prices, which actually were a 15-year high. Increase the demand of coffee contract with high prices, especially FTO contracts for trade on organic. Coffee represents in South America 55% of our share of our portfolio, so it's understandable that the number of disbursement will increase in South America. For Central America, even though coffee represents even a higher share of our portfolio, actually 75%, some accounts were actually closed during this period of time, mostly because of, I guess, incapacity to manage the price risk management risk. So even though current customers increased the disbursement, the overall effect was to decrease the total number of disbursement during 2022. Even though we tried to bring new customers to replace those accounts that were closed, it was not possible to generate a revert that trend. So that explains why South America and Central America behaved differently during 2022.
Thanks, Marco. And we've talked about coffee and cocoa already and touched a bit on those. And another key sector for CSAF members is tree nuts, and it's actually the third most important value chain. So I wanted to go back to Esther and see if you can give us some insights on the macadamia sector. I know that there were specifically increases in macadamia this year, and I'm curious how you perceive whether CSAF's participation in the nut sector will continue to grow, or if it will stay the same or decrease in the coming year or so.
Thank you, Andrea. For the macadamia sector, this has become an increasingly important crop for Kenya, and especially for those farmers who used to farm coffee, they are slowly turning into macadamia. We've seen a lot of growth in the industry in terms of production, in terms of the processors who are coming into the sector. But from November last year, we experienced a bit of challenges on the demand side. there was a bit of high production in South Africa, and then the demand slowed down because of the current inflationary environment. And what happens is that these nuts are considered to be luxury items. They're very easy to kick out of the budget when the consumers have to make options and prioritize. So we've seen a slowdown in demand, and this has affected the price of the commodity from a high of $17 per kilo to lows of $10 per kilo in a span of 6 months. And so the low prices are also affecting the processors and also the farm gate prices and what is getting paid to the farmers. However, in the second half of the year, we've seen the demand slowly coming up, but the prices are still low. So the demand is expected to grow gradually, and the prices will probably recover towards next year. But within this year, we have to deal with the low prices.
Okay, it sounds like we'll have to tread carefully throughout this year and then hope for a strong season in 2024. We've mentioned a lot of risks, and I want to zoom in on some of those shortly. Before we get into that, another one of the big trends this year, or one of the key highlights of the year, was that additionality remained very high among CSAF members, with 73% of CSAF borrowers borrowing from just one lender. And I know that in the case of shared interest, the majority of shared interest clients are only borrowing from shared interest. So I would love to hear from Marco maybe about what you think is the key to reaching clients who might otherwise be unserved.
Yes, well, in the case of shared interest, our historical policies have been more focused on supporting disadvantaged producer organizations with limited access to credit in order to increase our social impact. So that explains why our portfolio has been mostly, integrated by organizations where shared interest is the only lender. These facilities have been, ranged from $100,000 to $150,000. Even though in some regions we have been trying to balance that shape of the portfolio with larger organizations, perhaps with a lower risk profile, especially in Central America and South America. There are still regions where that part of the portfolio remains like in East Africa and West Africa. So it's definitely I guess a challenge for all social lenders to balance those type of organizations, and hopefully I guess we'll kind of keep that balance in the years forward.
Great, thank you. I think it's a good moment to talk about risk. Ada shared some of the highlights in terms of normalized PAR. And I would say that generally when we talk to CSAF members, both at the global and regional levels, we are consistently hearing that there are so many compounding risks right now. And in the annual report, we did try to zoom in on some of these. We have a call out section that I welcome you to explore, which focuses on price risk, climate risk, economic and political risk, as well as operational risk, and how CSAF members and borrowers can respond to those risks. And in particular, several CSAF members have reported decreasing their exposure for some clients in certain regions because of these increased risks. And I think it's one thing to look at them from a high level, but I would love to hear, maybe Marco, you can share more about some examples of how these risks are affecting borrowers in the day-to-day operations.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, I'll try to give some examples of specific countries. For instance, in Mexico, compared to other regions, even though Mexico is a large country with a large base of producer organizations, we have seen a special weaker governance and perhaps some issues regarding farmers' loyalty in second-level organizations that have, pushed us to look more carefully that sector of second-level coffee organization, especially. There's also another more technical risk related, for instance, to coffee organizations. Even though coffee quality in Mexico is highly regarded and it has really good price differentials, it's common to see low coffee yields, which somehow is reflected in agricultural practices that could improve significantly. So we also have to take a special look to that technical area before expanding our portfolio in Mexico. There are other countries that have different restrictions that limit our growth. For instance, in Nicaragua, based on the country's overall risk, we have reached since 2021 the limit that we have set for that specific countries with that specific country's risk. So we have not been able to increase the portfolio since 2021 in Nicaragua. And there are other countries with, I guess, a more recent phenomena that increase the overall risk, like Peru, in which we saw that after 2022, many crops were not able to manage the price risk management after the coffee price, which was pretty high, suddenly dropped significantly by the end of 2022. These crops experienced losses because they were, they bought a lot of coffee high prices by mid-22 without fixation and limited coverages. So when the price dropped, that created a lot of losses for this organization. So we're looking very carefully to the coffee sector in Peru now. So as you can see, it's different reasons for different countries, but yes, we have to be attent and focus to those trends before we decide to, of course, expand our portfolio in different countries.
Thanks, Marco. And I'm sure many of the similar challenges resonate with Esther's experience in Sub-Saharan Africa as well. I would love to hear, just taking a step back from Esther, where do you see kind of the future role of CSAF in addressing these risks?
We've seen a lot of collaboration, especially in East Africa, where we have different CSAF members lending to one client. We've seen an increase in the intercreditor agreements, and also collaboration when we have clients in distress. We realize that when we work individually with the client, they will share information with one member, different information with us, and they just give what you want to hear. But when you come together as CSAF members and collaborate, then the client has to share information jointly. And then we have integrity in the information we're getting. And we also see movement in terms of clients starting to pay when they were not paying for a long time.
Thanks, Esther. And Marco, do you have anything to complement Esther's thoughts coming from Latin America?
Oh, sure. Yes, as we have seen, price volatility is definitely a key issue for our portfolio, and is not only common in coffee with the historical volatility, but also in cocoa recently, especially in Cote d'Ivoire, and even in honey, a commodity that used to have a very constant pricing. So I guess it will be important to continue the training they have received, meaning social lender staff in price risk management, in order to try to assess that risk better. And other, I think, valuable support from CSAF is to continue and even expand the joint monitoring tools that we have been using, more focused on coffee, that even perhaps can be extended to other commodities that are important to our sector.
Thanks. I definitely think it's a task for CSAF to continue to push collaboration both at the global and the regional level. And in addition to certain trainings and tools that we can provide, I see a lot of value often in just providing a space to talk about specific challenges. I know last year when there was a lot of political unrest in Peru, which created some supply chain difficulties, and then that compounded with a falling coffee price, there was just a reaction to have a space amongst the Peruvian regional officers to talk about what was happening in the coffee market in Peru. And a lot of times before CSAF was created, those conversations were happening in silos. And one of the benefits of CSAF is creating that space where members can kind of learn from each other and react collectively. And I think that's something we can continue to push forward as we see a lot of these commodity market dynamics changing and shifting, and we need to be reactionary as CSAF members and then also on behalf of our borrowers. So I want to leave time for some Q&A, and I will just maybe before we jump to that, just ask about what the outlook looks like for 2023. I mean, we are looking at 2022 data that Ada has put together, but we're 6 months into 2023, so a lot of things have already changed since then. And I would love to hear both, maybe first from Marco and then from Esther. What do you see as the outlook for the rest of 2023 or the year ahead?
Thanks, Andrea. I'll try to segment that in the biggest commodities of share interest portfolio. So in terms of coffee, which represents 42% of our total portfolio, we may look a reduction in the total disbursements because the trend in coffee prices which is reducing, and also because we will try to assess better that increase in risk that we have seen mostly regarding price risk management. Hopefully we will be able to compensate that reduction in some new customers with larger disbursement in existing customers that we're more comfortable of working with. Regarding cocoa, could generate also similar effects since coffee prices have been reducing. Have been increasing recently, mostly because some weather phenomena in West Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire. So probably that phenomena will increase the disbursement in cocoa, which represents 25% of our portfolio, and hopefully will compensate, the reduction in coffee. But still, we have to see how the market reacts. I understand that the Ivory Coast government which regulates the coffee prices, has to also decide some policies going forward. So we have to be aware of what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. And regarding honey, yes, as well, honey prices are in a very low position right now, still high price availability, even though honey represents just 3% of our portfolio. We have to see how the market reacts, and hopefully we can continue supporting our beekeepers in this new phase that they're experiencing of price volatility. Honey has been, experiencing that volatility mostly because of the high inflation in Europe, which is the main market of honey, but also after some preference of honey buyers in Europe to buy honey from Ukraine, which is one of the top honey producers. So that's pretty much the outlook that we see. Hopefully, commodities increasing, some others decreasing will help balance and help our portfolio remain steady.
Thanks, Marco. And Esther, how would you describe your outlook for the agricultural lending sector in the year ahead?
The outlook for nuts continues to be gloom until probably the end of 2024. For coffee, the prices are a bit stable now, but we've seen the volatility. They could change anytime. Also for cashew, experiencing the same as macadamia. The only outlook that is looking positive now is for cocoa, because of the low production in Ivory Coast, but there's also concerns of climate change and El Nino and what that could do to the already dwindling production this year. So we continue to support our clients in this environment, and in case some of them are having distress, we continue to work together with them. Something else I forgot to mention is tea in Kenya, which is facing unprecedented challenges. Our main countries that we export to, Pakistan and Egypt, are having dollar issues, and this is affecting the payment. They used to be paid, their working capital cycle used to be about 20 to 30 days, and they're experiencing long cycles of up to 4 to 5 months because of the dollar issues in those two countries. So it's also a sector that is in distress.
That's such an interesting insight. I mean, it sounds like all of the commodity markets are facing various challenges on different fronts right now. So that's definitely an opportunity for us to continue collaborating and trying to innovate different ways to manage these risks and keep our borrowers strong during these times of crisis. I would like to transfer to the Q&A. I see a couple questions coming in already, and I'll invite the audience to continue to share questions in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and if you'd like to ask a question. I see one already for Esther. Tendai asked, we have heard that there are reports in Kenya from DNIS prices from academia plummeting to 20 shillings when they were previously at 200 shillings per kilogram. Do you think that lifting the ban on macadamia export would prop up the price? I'm not sure if you feel comfortable answering this question, Esther, but I'll let you decide.
Yeah, indeed. In 2019, the farm gate price for macadamia was 200 shillings. Between last year and this year, last year it was going for 90 shillings, and this year some brokers were taking advantage of the farmers and buying at 20 shillings, though most of the processors were buying at 50 shillings. With the current export price, if they buy above 50 shillings, the likelihood of breaking even is very minimal. So the price is determined by the consumer market price. And in terms of lifting the ban, what the Kenyan government did in response to the low prices is lifting the ban on export of raw nuts, which has been in place to encourage local processing. So lifting the ban in the view, they hoped that the Chinese buyers would come and take the nuts in shell, but even they are having an issue with market, and the demand is not as high as it used to be when they were buying nuts in shell. So the government lifted the ban, but it has not had any significant impact on the prices because these buyers are not coming, the ones who used to buy nuts in shell.
Thanks, Esther. I see another hand raised. I think it's also from Tendai. Do you want to ask your question on video?
Thanks, Esther. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Esther, for your explanation. We've heard that the decrease in prices of macadamia is not really caused by oversupply. Observers say it's cyclical, so it happens whenever there's a global recession or whenever there's an economic downturn. Like in this case, it was caused by the global recession, which was aggravated by the Ukrainian war. So I would like to ask, how far true is that the decrease in prices of macadamia is not caused by oversupply, but it's caused whenever there's an economic recession, like a global economic recession?
I would say partly because of the economic downturn. It's affecting the consumer's ability to purchase nuts. And since this is considered a luxury commodity, they can do without it. They can easily get it out of the budget until a time comes when they are able to afford it. Then secondly, on the production, South Africa doubled their production last year. And the South African crop comes around November, just before the Kenyan crop gets into the market. So by the time the Kenyan crop was getting into the market, there was already an oversupply from South Africa. And it is also expected that this year, the production for South Africa is going to be higher than last year. So there was oversupply, not necessarily in Kenya, but in a competing market, which is South Africa, that also affected that caused an oversupply in the consumer market and also caused the prices to come down.
Thanks, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, Tendai, also for the question. I find it often in commodity markets, it's very difficult to pull out one factor that's the influencing factor on price shifts. At least in coffee, it can be anything from economic crisis in consumer countries to origin countries, as well as the cost of oil, and all of these different factors, including weather changing patterns, are affecting the price. And I'm assuming some of the same complexity applies to the nut sector as well. Do I see any other raised hands or questions in the chat? If not, I have a couple I can pull out of the archives to ask our participants as well, but I want to make sure the audience has a chance. One question that we get most years is why a lot of the CSAF financing is focused in large commodity markets like coffee and cocoa. And maybe I would love to hear from Marco about why CSAF members have been drawn to these value chains, or maybe why it can be more challenging to work in domestic value chains or local food crops.
Andrea, yes, it's a common question, I guess. I believe this distribution of our finance and of our lending correspond to the actual, configuration of the global agro-export sector, in which coffee and cocoa are the most consumed commodities, and also because their seasonal behavior increases the financial needs of those producer or trade organizations involved in coffee and cocoa. So it's understandable that we have to support those sectors. In the particular case of shared interest, it is also quite aligned with the configuration of the fair trade sector, which is mostly coffee and then cocoa, and also because those are quite long-standing sectors where we have accumulated universal knowledge during all these years and even decades, where social lenders have been involved with. There's a lot of maturity in the sector. And that help us anticipate and manage the risk better. It has been quite a long learning curve that social lenders have experienced managing those commodities. And even though we would like to expand our portfolio to new commodities and even new countries, there's always a risk involved. We have to build that learning curve, accumulate experience. And we have particularly challenging years after the pandemic, the recovery of many economies, global logistic crisis that increased the cost, also high inflation, which is increasing many cost of supply. So it's a little bit more difficult to expand to new commodities during the current years, but I guess that it's also at least an effort that it's going to be common for most of our social lenders to diversify our portfolio as much as we can.
Thanks, Marco. And I know that many CSAF members have expressed a desire to support more diversification in local value chains, but given the many challenges that come alongside of that, we'll have to see in the coming year or 2 years, the mid to short term, what CSAF members are able to achieve in those other sectors. I see a question coming in from Matthias. I would love to have you invite your question.
Sure. I don't know whether my camera doesn't work, but you can hear me, I take it. Great. Yeah, thank you for these interesting presentations and the interesting exchange. I'm relatively new to the agricultural field with Oikocredit. I'm working now in sustainable impact, and I'm interested in what kind of aspects in social or environmental aspects do you think are becoming bigger in the near future? So we heard gender was part aspect of this research paper that you produced. What other aspects do you think will gain in importance in the near future? Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias. I have some thoughts. I'll let maybe Marco or Esther share first, and then I can complement.
Well, yes, definitely regarding technical assistance and support programs for our farmer or producer organization customer. Yes, I think it's always important to attend those elements that help create risk and help those organizations thrive, like private risk management, governance, and even climate related challenges that may help them prevent eventually production drops, which is, I guess, common, especially in our region with intensive rains. So whenever there's that La Niña phenomenon, which is an alternative phenomenon that occurs, well, usually every 2-3 years now, it's really hard to predict. But also other programs like gender equality, like for instance, promote women to develop businesses around coffee to increase their revenue, for instance, selling roasted coffee in their local communities. There's also, I guess, interest on supporting IT programs that could also create more efficiency around organizations and even improve the technical assistance that farmers receive now. It's common, at least in some regions, that many farmers have access to smartphones. So any app that will help them improve their operation at their farms, even manage their farms accessing buying products to that app if it's provided by the cooperative or other NGO. Those are also, I guess, trendy and important topics in regarding technical assistance and support.
Thanks, Marco. I would compliment that the first two that come to mind for me when we think about the most urgent topics in terms of impact and environmental sustainability is, I mean, climate change continues to remain very urgent. And so CSAF members are continuing to look for borrowers who are at the forefront of that and who are contributing to positive environmental impact, either through agroforestry or renovation or more like technical interventions to mitigate climate or adapt to it. And then I would say the other very urgent topic from a social impact perspective is engaging youth. And this is a worldwide crisis in agriculture, that there are just not enough youth who are uptaking agriculture. And the average age of farmers is continuing to increase. So that's certainly a priority, a very challenging one, to incorporate more cooperatives or private enterprises which are incorporating youth, led by youth, and managed by youth. Esther, do you have any compliments to my comments or to Marco's comments around impact?
Yeah, I would say supporting programs that support processors to achieve certification as they open new markets, governance, and also climate change and insurance for the smallholders.
Great, thank you. Well, I see we're already at the top of the hour, so I hate to cut this short, but I'm very thankful, grateful for Marco and Esther to contribute to the panel today, and thank you for the many active participants who were able to join us. And please, if you have time, please download the annual report and you can dig into some of these findings in much more detail. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks also to Ada for presenting and to our members for contributing the data. We think this is a very important contribution to the sector and grateful for another year of this conversation. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.